Hey, welcome to another episode of Security and GRC Decoded. I'm your favorite host, Raj Krishnamurthy. And today we have the awesome Sergio Alonso with us. And Sergio currently leads trust and governance at Rapid7, but an amazing career, right? Progressing of 17 years, progressing from auditing into high-tech compliance, I should say, Sergio.
Yep.
And into cybersecurity. So I think if there is anything in the journey that we should talk about, I think Sergio has got it all. So super excited to have this conversation with you, Sergio.
Thank you so much, Raz, for the opportunity.
For our listeners, Sergio, maybe let's take a step back. Maybe talk about our experience from an auditor through a hyper-regulated industry all the way to you're currently leading trust and governance at Rapid7. What was the journey like?
Yeah. So even before working for a financial institution in a super highly regulated environment, working as an external auditor or an external consultant is way so different when you are just going somewhere, asking for the questions, asking for the information, and then you move to the other dark side of the world, I guess. When you are working with the different teams, implementing, operating, making sure that things are working as expected in all these highly regulated environments is way more challenging. And for me, it was kind of an eye-opening experience when I joined Santander Bank here in the US, because the bar was so high. As you can imagine, many progress in terms of compliance and regulation have been coming because of the financial industry. And in the US, comparing with Spain, is way higher than you can expect, right? And I guess that was my first kind of reality shock, learning, enabling myself in a different super high regulated environment. After that, progressing to the other side, right? How can you operate in the same level in a more tech space where you don't have perhaps that pressure? Has been for me a great reference. My experience with working for a bank and making this happen there.
What was that reality? You said it was a reality shock. What was that, and why was that?
I guess it's the level of thoroughness that you would expect when you work for a bank. You don't have only 3 lines of defense. You have 17 lines of defense, right? You are working under the CTO organization. You are working in the supposed first line of defense, but you have, internal control, internal audit. You have the control testing team. You have the different risk management functions. You have the second line of defense. You have then your external evaluators, right? So when you need to do something right 17 times, of course you need to do it right at the very first attempt, right? Because if not, for sure somebody's going to be spotting where are you falling short.
Got it. So so you worked in a highly regulated environment like Santander Bank, and then you went on to work in blockchain for Akamai, and then you went on to work for a company like Twitter, right? And now you're at Rapid7. What was that transition when you moved from such a very regulated environment like Santander into a company like Twitter or Akamai?
I guess for me, everything is context, right? I remember when I first joined Akamai, my first weeks working there, I was always using Santander Bank as a reference. Like, this is the way that I have been, doing things in the last few years. And I think it was a approach that was totally off. At the end of the day, you need to contextualize yourself in the industry that you're operating and understanding the new expectations that you need to meet. I always say that when you join a new place, you are there because of your previous experience, which is a tool, but not the only tool that you need to apply. Working for Akamai and contextualizing my previous high regulated experience for an environment that, perhaps goes faster, has a different perspective or a different risk profile, adapting yourself to it, I think it was the right transition to make in order to keep enabling, instead of protecting, I'm going to go old-fashioned, a mainframe system, protecting a new financial solution based on blockchain, where Akamai was partnering with MUFG, the Japanese bank, and using all that knowledge context to apply the same level of thoroughness in a different setup, different context, and different new technology that was blockchain back a few years back.
Okay, and Alonso, one of the sort of, I think we all have stereotypes, right? And one of the stereotypes is that when you work for these large banks, right, and when you use the word GRC, most people think of the word compliance and checks, right, and sort of the ritual nature of compliance. And in a company like Akamai, right, there are no sacred cows, like you were saying. So when they were looking at you, did they have apprehensions on how somebody like you with a very strong auditing and advisory experience and a large bank experience would fit into a company like Akamai?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the very first challenges was, let's use SOC 2 as a reference, right? Translating the trust service criteria and the different requirements and common criteria controls from SOC 2 to a context of blockchain in a company like Akamai, right? When you talk with your engineers saying, we need to show proof of full redundancy in a system that is not operating in a traditional, primary data center, secondary data center, perhaps even you have a disaster recovery center. Of course, in the cloud context, this is way, way different, right? But when you are building a system that is resilient by design with different nodes across different regions, the concept of how can we execute a disaster recovery test, for example, right? That was something that when you are using perhaps this more legacy mindset in a new environment, is the challenge, and that compromising conversations with all the engineers help to move this thing forward and translating the expectations of a SOC 2 on something that was never done before.
Got it. So I think Akamai is a lot more discussion and participation with the engineering teams, what you would have done at Santander. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And how, as a GRC professional, maybe I'll take a step back. What is your perspective on G and R and C?
I mean, I think I have seen lately that question asked a few times, probably it's just, now it's a legacy term, right? I think compliance gives you the context from what expectations do you need to meet, right? Governance is what you use to orchestrate end-to-end meeting those expectations, and the R is the tool that you have in place to manage your deviations from that expectation that is compliance telling you to meet, right? I think right now it's an archaic or legacy concept that should be kind of adapting to a new for new times that I don't know yet how it's gonna be, but for sure it needs to transform in something different.
Okay. Now you today your role is you lead trust and governance. You don't say, I mean, when I look at your LinkedIn profile, you don't say you lead GRC, right? Which is what you used to say when you were in Santander. Now you say trust and governance. Compare and contrast that word trust and the word GRC. And I'm not just trying to play word games here. What I'm trying to understand is there a fundamental difference in the way you think about them?
For a company like Rapid7 that operates in the business-to-business ecosystem, like we serve other customers, we have more than 11,000 customers. I think trust is upfront for us, right? And trust is the tool that we have to meet our customer expectations and to improve our own security posture. I'm gonna say I will miss the the word risk on that name, and it's something that we are debating internally. And governance is kind of the orchestration that we have to make those trust expectations from all of our stakeholders. Externally, our customers, our auditors, but also internally, our executive team, our CISO, and all of our partners.
Okay. And what do you think is the perspective that others outside of the trust of the GRC organization, other than your organization, have on GRC? How do engineers feel about GRC, and how do leaders feel about GRC?
That's another good one. It depends on each organization, right? And even within the same GRC team, you can have different initiatives that your stakeholders is gonna be considering it in a different way, right? Who is excited about running through an audit? Like, I don't know, like it's our bread and butter, but at the end of the day, nobody gets excited about it, right? But who is excited about pushing the envelope a little bit, implementing the new controls that, a new standard where you may have some gaps is pushing you to do better, right? That's different, exciting. So I guess when we have the right proposal for the teams, the feedback and the excitement is way different when you need to keep running things that you have been running before. And this is where GRC needs to keep evolving and being more efficient, right? Reducing that friction with the teams that you work with. And, in the tech space or in a bank, in any company, engineers are a key partner for GRC. So you need to really handle and set up the right expectations with them.
Got it. So you're saying that don't just tell them what to do. I think make sure that they understand what they are doing and take them along in this journey, right? Makes it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you use the word that reduce the friction. Engineers, what is causing this friction?
I think there are different fronts, right? You can have compliance fatigue, and this is where this approach of meeting once, meeting many can help to rationalize the level of effort that you may require from your partners. That's one. Especially, when you work in a global complex environment, serving different regions, serving all the industries, like how can you meet expectations for all of them, right? And the devil is in the details, as you know. The other one is on a daily basis, what can you do to improve your iterations with them in a way that you don't do busy work or non-appreciative work, and you start thinking about where are we spending more time and getting less value, right? I always repeat this, with my team, with my partners, like Pareto principle. How can we keep applying that 20% to do 80% of the work? I know it's easy to say, easy to claim, but it's kind of a philosophy or a North Star that is important always to keep in mind.
Okay. And so I think that leads me to this natural question, right? Given your background working very closely with the engineering teams, what is your view of automation? And I'm going to maybe I'll break it down. Automating evidence collection, controls testing. And how do you think GRC engineering as a discipline fits into this?
It's the only way to go. That's my first take.
Okay.
With no automation, it's impossible to scale up your program in a way that doesn't cause more friction than necessary, right? There is some level of transactionality, and you need to have some key basics steps in place in order to make everything happen. But framing properly the scope where applies automation to me is the very first step, right? I do believe that sometimes we claim innovation, now with AI, with automation in a way that sometimes we transform the problem. And what I mean with that is I have seen many times, enabling massive automation or gap assessments, like just snapping your fingers and finding yourself with millions of findings and creating a different problem about, okay, what is next, right? What makes sense? What is your pace or gap remediation flow in order to keep a proper pace, helping the organization to get better and not just being buried in a massive amount of problems that is impossible to solve. You mentioned about evidence gathering, right? not everything applies when thinking about where automation can help you with your evidence gathering. Probably evidence gathering is the most boring task ever. Like, and looking back, screenshotting things, and like who. I think we were crazy before, right? And now hopefully we have many folks enabling and having the right thinking, like you, helping companies to move to the next level. And this is where scoping properly for your context, selecting, iterating fast, and proving the value of automation for evidence gathering and compliance checks is the only way to move forward.
Makes sense. So one thing that is bothering me a lot, Sergio, is that you have worked through the compliance aspects of the company, right? And you worked on strongly with the engineering teams. You have a significant emphasis on automation. But when I think about automation, right, and for example, take evidence collection as an example, and even as you move away from screenshots into collecting them directly from APIs, when I use the word evidence, people normally associate that word to compliance and audits. They don't associate that with risk management, right? Continuously managing risks or the ability for you to be able to collect signals and metrics towards risk management, right? They don't think about sort of managing this from a governance perspective. Why is that? Why are these, even though we are trying to do the same things, because they are all essentially the same types of data in slightly different contexts, aren't they towards the same outcome? Why are people thinking about these things differently, or am I wrong?
I think you're right, and probably this is still the legacy mindset that is living with all of us. When I executed my first audit, it was in 2008, and the concept of evidence has transformed massively since then. At the end of the day, evidence is proof of rightness, right? And proof of rightness means that what you want to do is behaving in the way that you want, right? And there are multiple ways of evidencing that thesis. And I think framing the narrative where you have an important risk that you need to take care of, and you can show live proof of all your controls or key controls addressing that risk are operating in a way that you expect, is the concept is way beyond evidence. I think we all think about evidence like a different piece of paper where you look at to prove a thesis happening somewhere else, right? And with this automation and live view on behavior of a system or a process, people or everything together is what is making a difference.
Interesting. So what you're basically saying is that you're seeing all of them as interconnected. The
Absolutely.
idea of yes, you can collect data and you can use that as a means for proof, or as you rightly said, proof of rightness. But it can also be used for a bunch. So it is much beyond just trying to satisfy an audit. Is what you're saying?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, an audit is the last line of defense, right? I know there is a lot of hate against compliance, but again, this is kind of a legacy mindset. At the end of the day, you can base your security program in your own judgment and expertise, or you can base your security program or complement your security program with security best practices, baselines, or any type of compliance regime, right? When you are doing an audit which has many limitations, and that's another problem of the world right now, and you are failing an audit because you're not meeting the basic compliance expectations, I mean, not shame on you, but at the end of the day, you are failing the really last resort to test that you're doing the right thing.
Okay. But I think one of the challenges that most leaders face, right, and most practitioners face, is that even if you're willing to move at a much faster clip, right, in terms of automating a lot of this process, bringing engineering principles into this, the last mile seems to be that you'll have to convince your auditors, internal and external auditors. What has been your experience in that?
To me, always convincing auditors is just a natural consequence of doing everything important right before, the way I dream about audits is having a package ready for an auditor where you have the whole history of your context scope with your policies, with your narratives, with the 12 months of, if applicable, from a time perspective, every single data point showing these are my 75 promises, and this is proof of rightness for these 75 key controls operating 24/7 during 12 months. That will be the consequence of a properly run information security and GRC program. That's the dream that I'm sure I'm not alone and everybody's having right now.
I love the word here. Did you use the word promise? Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very, very interesting way to phrase this problem. So you're basically thinking about this as promises being made and promises being kept, right? And so do you think of controls as promises being made? Is that how you think about them?
Absolutely. I mentioned before your security program is fed with the best security expert criteria, optional best practices, and compliance/regulatory non-negotiable. It's up to you to decide what are your promises for the company, right? And honoring those promises when you have the responsibility of protecting the footprint of your company in the global complex world we live in is the minimum expectation from the information security and GRC team, right? Streamlining and simplifying that narrative about what is your mission for this company, what are the ingredients that you need to apply to support your mission, and be transparent about how you are accomplishing that mission.
Okay, got it. I want to go back to your experience, and especially I want to go back to Akamai because where you started about sort of talking about blockchain, right? What have you worked on zero knowledge proofs?
Yeah, that
And
was part of it. Yeah.
Can you describe to our users what are zero knowledge proofs and what was your work around zero knowledge proofs?
I guess in simple terms, and of course, I wasn't the creator of this, but of course, a key partner. Basically, is without the information being able to prove that something that needs to happen is happening, right? And I think for the context of the project that I was supporting in the payment and credit card transaction world, I think that's something key, right? You are going to a shop, you have a merchant, you use your credit card, you make a transaction, you have a clearance entity, you have your bank. So how can you move all that sensitive information that, from a PCI perspective it's clearly, limited, defined. Like probably one of the beauties of PCI is from a scope perspective is one of the most specific things that you can find, right?
Yep.
So leveraging one of the key engineering tenets of blockchain for zero proof to make sure that you have multiple entities talking to each other. You have a central ledger, keeping everybody honest. You leverage that engineering tenet to make sure that everybody feels comfortable even without having all the information.
Got it. And I think maybe that's a very interesting principle, right? Because you are basically saying you don't have to expose all the sensitive data, but you are able to provide assurance that the right things are happening, right, on those controls. Did you expand that beyond blockchain controls into other security and GRC controls as well, Sergio, this idea of zero knowledge proofs?
I've been thinking about that lately, and right now companies and especially cybersecurity companies where you have a high bar for trust and transparency, I think that concept has an important role in the next years. How you as a vendor can show proof of the strength of your security program without over disclosing your weaknesses, right? Because let's be honest, everybody has weaknesses. If not, an information security program or a risk management function will be useless, and you are in continuous improvement, especially on this global threat landscape that we need to live with. So I think applying that concept from blockchain in the new emerging powerful trust opportunity that many companies out there are trying to capitalize will be to me another dream. Like, how can I keep so improved to my 11,000 customers that what we're doing is right and you can trust our position?
I would love to double click and maybe do a separate session with you. And I want to call out another one of our guests earlier, Mosi Platt, who works at Netflix. He has been a big proponent of this idea for a long time. I know it is a forward looking, but we would love to. I think we should double click and do a session just on this, right? And I would love to do that.
Absolutely.
I want to take the experience from Akamai. I think that's a very interesting segue because I don't know whether to call it X or Twitter. I think
I want to stick with Twitter so far.
Twitter, okay, let's stick with Twitter. At Twitter, you built the GRC team for privacy from the scratch. What was that experience like, Sergio?
So it was awesome. Great company. And something that I always like to highlight at the very beginning is it was the only time that I have not been working under the CTO, CIO, CISO organization. I reported to the Chief Privacy Officer, who reported to the General Counsel. So my team members were lawyers and project and program managers. And just the concept of risk management with lawyers, boom, is just
they don't fit well.
A massive conflict, right? One of the tenets of risk management is writing down the things that are, important and broken. And from a lawyer perspective, it took some time to click in the way that, and I understand. Okay, I think it's a massive empathy exercise that I went through. One of the great things about Twitter was there was already an up and running security team with a GRC function that when you are arriving to a new page, you don't want to say nothing is usable, and you just want to use existing prototypes and adapt for your scope, right, for your context. And you have a GRC team running, the G, the R, the C, so you can try to figure out what is the vehicle or the structure that you can replicate and adapt and customize for the privacy context. Something that I really love about Twitter was the team was called privacy and data protection. And something that stuck with my mind is privacy gives you context and sense of the regulations, and data protection is the extension where you partner with information security to protect the data, right? And sometimes I think that in a GRC security focus, you don't have that context. We focus on critical assets. We focus on critical data types, but the use case of the information is something that I have not experienced a lot in a company. And when I was working at Twitter building a GRC for privacy, the amount of context that can give you a lawyer, understanding and translating the regulations on specifics for your own GRC program helps you to be more targeted in your outcomes and priorities.
Okay. But at a company like Twitter, I would assume that the focus is more on privacy and not on GRC, right?
Yeah.
Because you are not necessarily subjected to a lot of regulations. Is that a fair thing to say?
Twitter being a consumer app, of course, privacy was one of the top 5 enterprise risks, and for any type of company on that business, right? Privacy was an extension. GRC was an extension of the privacy needs, right? And this is public data, but one of the needs for Twitter to build a GRC function for privacy was the consent decree that they got from the Federal Trade Commission, right?
Yep.
All this is public. There were some problems managing user data, and the FTC asked Twitter, and also find them with 150 million. You need to uplift your security program, and you need to create a GRC function for your privacy program, right? So it was the missing piece that in this case the regulator observed missing in order to make sure that everything that Twitter should be doing, all those promises that we mentioned before, were properly documented, orchestrated, disseminated, and honored.
And how did you bring the Twitter engineers to work with you on this? Because they are going to be notoriously anti-compliance, anti-GRC, possibly even anti-privacy, I would assume, right?
Always pivoting, right, and framing what is the final problem or North Star that we're trying to achieve, right? And keep pivoting, iterating, reflecting, incorporating the feedback, adjusting, and fine-tuning for the expectations that are always changing so quickly.
Okay. I want to come back to your Rapid7, and I think when we were speaking last time, you said something very, very interesting. So you said the infrastructure security team is customer zero.
Yeah, so Rapid7 is a cybersecurity company heavy on detection and response, quality management, cloud security, and other few things. So I have the opportunity, and this is one of the coolest things about working for a company like Rapid7, right? You are the cybersecurity team of the cybersecurity company, right?
Yeah.
So all those products that Rapid7 and services and professional services that is developing, externally for the market, when there is an internal consumer within the company, automatically belongs part of the customer zero program, which somehow helps to give feedback as practitioner to product team and impact better the roadmap of the product. And we information security, being in a security company, we are part of that program.
And I love the way you phrase it, right? Because you are in some ways sort of acting and providing not only to solve the internal operations, but you're also trying to help in terms of better customer relations, better product release, so on and so forth. You also said something very interesting early on, Sergio. You said that I think the flip side of automation is that I don't know if you quite said that, but is that it produces a lot of signals, or in other words, a lot of noise potentially.
Yep.
And then the question is, what are the signals from the noise, right? The sort of the needle in the haystack problem. How do you think about these things, especially in a company like Rapid7, where you're essentially creating a whole bunch of signals, right? And from looking at postures of different infrastructure, how do you manage that as a GRC team to increase the signal from the noise?
Yeah. I always think that at the end of the day, an information security function is let's say a data management function, right? So data is what you manipulate, you use to your job, and you keep ingesting every day in your program in different ways, right? So even agnostic of Rapid7, when you have multiple tools with multiple data points, what means operating that tool successfully, right? Something that I have experienced in other companies as well is when you start having visibility in a complex, heterogeneous ecosystem, it's difficult to decide, okay, where we get started, and this is where, again, context is extremely important, right? How many tools are out there giving you false positives, because the rule and the rationale behind the logic that you are using when you talk back to the right system owner or SME saying, this is off because, or this doesn't apply to us, or I think the rating criteria is inflated, is giving, a concern that we don't have, or perhaps Fairly is missing the control environment that tool doesn't have visibility over, right? I will say that there are a few things that for us is super important is, first of all, from a footprint perspective, focusing first on the most critical and more exposed footprint and try to narrow as much as possible. Of course, focus on the real true positives that you are seeing, and then iterate fast. At the end of the day, this is not about you plugging in something and out of blue having thousands of issues. Is how looks like the end-to-end cycle from spotting, assessing, triaging, confirming, remediating, and testing validation that the problem is gone now, right? So I think those 3 steps is the not the secret sauce, but the only way to move forward.
I think you're bringing up a very interesting point, which is that I think context is key in all of this, what you're saying. But one of the challenges, what I see as a fundamental paradox, Sergio, is that if you look at the cybersecurity market and the investors' perspective of cybersecurity market, let's say the venture investors and all the startups, they want to go solve a problem as commonly as possible, right? I want to go solve this problem that I can just keep minting for hundreds and thousands of customers, right?
Yeah.
The challenge there is that there you are losing context, right? You're not necessarily talking about every single company. You're doing something that can be broadly applicable. So at some point, each of these tools are going to produce data that may be noise for a given company, right? Overall, it may be, but for a given company, it's going to create noise. And you multiply that by the number of tools that an organization is required to deploy from a security perspective, right? So when you say context is king and you're using all these different tools, and you're getting all these different data, where do you apply this context then? Because each of them have their own context that is producing this noise. So what should be the role of the GRC team and the security team in reducing this or bringing more context and reducing this noise? How should they think about it?
Probably that's the most and very first step running a GRC program, right? How you gather the context that you can share with your peer teams, security operations, the security cloud team, to make sure that we prioritize on the right spaces, right? I think one of the biggest challenges is asset management and visibility. When you are operating in a complex ecosystem where you have your public cloud deployments, you have multiple SaaS vendors, you may have also some on-prem infrastructure, you have your endpoints in different ways, right? You may have big 6 buckets of different contexts, right? You may need 6 different tools or less, and then you need to aggregate all the data, right? I think the concept of securing depth, layering, what you should be prioritizing first, it's something that, if I mentioned before that information security is about managing data, the team owning the responsibility to aggregate all the right data points is the GRC team.
I think that's a great point. And I want to go back to, I think, which is exactly the point you were making, even with the inflated scores. Let's take CVSS as an example, right? But in order to do this, you need to have a very strong engineering practice. You can't do this manually. It is almost practically impossible. You have to automate this. So what is the role of the GRC team in building engineering around this? So is GRC engineering real? And do you go hire engineers in the GRC team? How do you go about doing this?
Setting up the framework, and I know framework perhaps is another word that may have folks raising their eyebrow, but having the right framework with the key decision points to empower teams to keep in an autonomous way reducing risk, basically. GRC engineering is a reality, period, no doubt. It is true that GRC engineering can be living in your GRC team, in your information security team, out of the information security team, right? Everybody wants to be jack of all trades, and I think that's something important. But GRC engineering is the catalyst.
Okay.
Given all those data points that you need to gather from your, ecosystem, context, scope, to then give that back to your partners in order to help them to expedite decisions with a risk focus.
Beautiful. So what I think, if I can rephrase what you're saying, is that the GRC team acts as the catalyst to bring everything this together, but at some point you also want to democratize so your partners
Absolutely.
can make the right decisions as well. Now, as a leader, Sergio, how do you build a business case to your management team about building this GRC engineering practice? It may not have been a challenge for you in tech forward companies, but what general advice would you give to our listeners when they think about, okay, how am I going to go about justifying this to my management? How should they think about this?
Again, context, in this case, business context, is golden, right? What is your driver? Is the R or is it the C? The G for sure is not going to be your driver, right? But when you are in a business to business, landscape, you need to serve your big enterprise or federal customers, right? So there is a big C that you can leverage to push the envelope with your information security program, but also to say, I need to meet these customer expectations. This is the investment that we need to make. This is the security improvements that we're going to have. And this is the ROI or the market opportunity that we have ahead, right? When perhaps you can not lean that much on the C, this is where the R is relevant, right? How you can, and of course, both can be combined, right? How can you frame real exposures, past incidents, big gaps? You can leverage, independent pen testing, anything that can help you to expose the weaknesses across your footprint, and keep building. We need to protect, those specific assets this way. We need to build these capabilities. This is our peers are doing. I think from a purely GRC perspective, the C and the R for your business context is what, you can leverage in multiple ways, basically.
Okay. And I think when we spoke briefly last time, you were talking about this also helps you to go from lagging indicators to leading indicators, if I remember right.
Yep.
How important is that for you?
Well, as a security practitioner, you don't want to be clean up the mess, right? You want to prevent the mess. So clearly, lagging is when you go after the fact, and leading is when you are preventing that breach. I think, honestly, I'm gonna be super transparent here, but probably it's always a combination of both, right? Because how can you take the credit of things that never happen, right? You can be lucky, you can be optimizing your resources in a awesome way, but sometimes when something bad happens, and not necessarily to you, but to your peers, when you have a high-profile security situation across the world, right? I think last year with CrowdStrike and the situation we had in July, I think probably made everybody thinking about what is your release process, and are you ready for that, right? So I think combining both is what can you start helping you shifting from lagging to leading, right? And every time that something happens, in your company, and even if it's small, you need to think about, okay, we detected this within 3 hours. Imagine the consequences if this happens for 7 days, right? Or if instead of being one S3 bucket are 5,000 S3 buckets, and you can link this with records and etc. So I think that part of simulation, that part of what if, I think there are awesome folks out there, pushing the frontier with cyber risk quantification is another catalyst that can help us to make better decisions based on data that we don't have because it's not past data, right? And it's the key tool for that shifting to leading instead of lagging.
Okay, no, that's a great point. I usually ask about people's hot take very early on. Maybe I'll ask you much later. What is one hot take you have in the world of GRC, the world of security?
I think it's a delusional hot take, but future is on-prem. And what I mean with that is
Future is on-prem. That's what
on-prem,
you
yeah,
said. Okay.
on premises. And what I mean with that is, internet broke, then cloud, now AI, right? With any next breakthrough, we have the ability to build faster and better, but we also increase our level of exposition, right? And the ability, for attackers or even human error, to expose ourselves, right? I think, of course, this is not going to happen to everything, but there are going to be some X mandate regulation in the future asking you to protect your crown jewels, right? We are seeing already a trend with that, with cloud sovereignty, data localization in a specific country, region. I think it's the very first step. But when you have some specific systems that, should be the most isolated ever, I think we're going to see some things coming back to prem and leaving the cloud environment. Just as an idea, okay? I'm not saying everything, of course, because it doesn't make sense. You are going to lose your ability to compete with others. But if you pick wisely, you can prevent the bigger problems.
So what I'm hearing you say is that I think it is not going to be a blind all on cloud proposition. It has to be an intelligent, tiered, risk-based hybrid where you at least take some of your most based on privacy, data protection,
Yeah.
as you bring them on, and you're saying that shift can potentially happen.
Absolutely. All the narrative that we are seeing, in the cybersecurity race is around exposure, right? So how can you manage that exposure if you are not exposed, basically?
Got it. Makes sense. What do you think as a GRC practitioner for 15, 17 years, Sergio? What do you think is the state of the current tooling?
It's progressing the right way. Right now, I think there are two worlds, right? The archers, the folks that led the way and have an important footprint right now, and then the new emerging competitors that are using a more sophisticated tech stack, a more pragmatic mindset, and I would say listening to a different segment of customers, And now we have these two worlds, and you can see that so easily out there. How it's gonna be changing in the next years, I don't know. I zooming out of GRC, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, it's one of the industries with the biggest growth ahead, and there are gonna be many Palo Alto buying CyberArk situations. And CyberArk is a huge company by itself. So imagine at a startup, ABCD level. So it's gonna be kind of crazy, right? But honestly, what I love about this is these new competitors are changing the rules of the game, and I hope that eventually somebody is going to come up with a blueprint that is going to transform GRC. We talked before about how can you prove your trust without giving away your sensitive information, right?
Yeah.
So something like that eventually is going to happen, and it's going to change the way we do business.
Got it. And what are there any significant gaps that you see with the current tooling that you hope existed?
There is a little bit of AI hype, that's for sure, which I think we need. I mean, there are many things happening right now, right? But the immediate gap is the promise that is not fully delivered in some instances. And I know this is a huge hot topic right now, but that's something that we are seeing. Especially, and just not only for cybersecurity, but when you oversee the third-party risk management function and you see all the vendors out there, you can see that it's agnostic of just the cybersecurity industry. I think it's visibility and empowering the user to gain
Beautiful.
context quickly.
Got it.
We talk about this. What is the point of having millions of data points if you are lacking the context, and the next thing that you're going to be doing is looking for an owner to gain that context, right? How can you integrate that context in the end-to-end process in the GRC tool?
Oh, that's a brilliant point. So I think you said two things. Number one, build better context, build inclusive users.
Yeah.
And when you say users, are you talking about those folks in the GRC team, or does it go beyond into engineering, operations, and other teams?
Both at the end. And this is a term that we use at Twitter. A GRC person, maybe a shepherd, right, has a responsibility guiding others. But others need to walk that way. So it's both. At the end of the day, if you are giving the context, parameterizing the context, fine-tuning the context, then others are going to be doing their job in a better way and seeing the value that GRC is giving to them.
I love the analogy. So you are GRC as a shepherd,
Yeah.
which means that they have to act as a consultant coach, and basically they are orchestrating across the entire enterprise, right? It is not the small GRC team. Beyond that, got it.
Absolutely. And just to give you one example, when you go to an engineer with the right problem, which of course is having security, you have an ally forever, because they are so in to fix and address that. It's a beautiful experience and happens hopefully to everybody, but having the right problems with the right people is a great catalyst.
Beautifully said. I love it. We are approaching almost the end of the segment, and I wanted to. So, are there any books, podcasts, anything that you listen to, or people that have helped you to get here where you are, Sergio, that you want to do a shout out?
I need to do a better job with that. Now I'm trying to focus myself on a few e-learning platforms that now we have at Rapid7. I have a few books, around risk management. I'm halfway of how to quantify anything on cyber risk. Great book, and I always check in on that when we have some internal situations, and probably if I can recommend one podcast, is this one, which is the main one I'm following nowadays. Your podcast.
No, big thanks. Thank you very much. I love it. Thank you very much, Sergio. My final question to you is that you actually had one of those fairy tale experiences, in my opinion, in GRC, a large regulatory bank moving into a company like Akamai, Twitter, Rapid7. So to somebody who's listening to this, right, and wants to say, I want to be this next Sergio, right? How do I get myself into these much more forward-looking, innovative GRC sort of companies and programs? What would your advice be to them? How can they approach this?
That's a great question. I always gonna be grateful about the experience I got in Ernst & Young and Deloitte. Because every single month was like 1 year. I was lucky enough to work for multiple big customers at the same time, doing different type of projects, and I learned a lot. I think having the opportunity to land first in a place where you're gonna have 360 visibility is gonna give you a perspective of what things are out there. I don't know how that has changed right now, but to me made a difference, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have that opportunity, because it's difficult to rotate across different industries, projects, and areas of expertise, trying to be patient, bringing ideas. It doesn't matter if you are, just starting your career. At the end of the day, if you keep pushing yourself to solve problems that are relevant for the company, are gonna put you in the right place pretty soon.
Got it. No, I think that's with that call for action, and I want to end the session today. Sergio, thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience with us. This has been super fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Raz. Thankful for the opportunity, and this has been great.